A powerful billionaire had already lost hope after spending a fortune trying to restore his son's hearing. No doctor, no treatment, no technology seemed to work. The boy arrived at the hospital in complete silence until one ordinary little girl made a shocking discovery. Something so simple and unexpected that it would forever change the life of that boy and his entire family. Before you begin, click subscribe and tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today? The billionaire was a man who always had control over everything in his life. He managed companies, made huge deals every day, and had thousands of people working under his orders. Nothing ever escaped his control, but all of that meant nothing when he got the news about his son. One day, the boy suddenly stopped reacting to sounds. At first, the billionaire thought it was temporary, maybe an infection or something simple. But as the days passed, tests showed that his son had lost his hearing completely. The man who could fix any business problem couldn't fix this. He hired the best doctors from different countries, brought in top specialists, and paid millions for treatments, hoping one of them would bring his son's hearing back. But nothing worked. Every visit ended in disappointment. Slowly, a heavy silence fell over his house, and the boy stopped smiling. The father felt completely powerless. Time kept passing, and the boy's condition didn't change. The father grew more desperate. He filled the boy's room with expensive toys and hired therapists and teachers who used different methods, but nothing seemed to help. The boy became more closed off and disconnected from everything around him. The father visited hospitals regularly, always hoping for some miracle. He watched his son sit silently, not reacting to anything or anyone. The boy never cried, never laughed. He just sat there quietly, lost in his own world. The billionaire, who once believed money could solve anything, now faced a problem he couldn't buy a solution for. He didn't understand how something like this could happen so suddenly. He felt guilt, frustration, and sadness all at once. He had never felt so small in his life. He stopped going to meetings. He stopped taking calls. His entire focus was on his son, but the more he tried, the more helpless he felt. One afternoon, the billionaire and his son were at the hospital again. It was a routine visit, and the father didn't expect anything new. They were sitting in the waiting room. The boy was playing with a small toy in his hand, not paying attention to anything around him. The father sat nearby, looking at his son with tired eyes. Other families were walking through the hallway. Nurses passed by, talking to each other. Everything was normal, the same as it always was. Then, a little girl appeared. She looked about the same age as the boy. She wasn't shy. She walked straight into the room and started looking around. Her parents weren't close by, but she didn't seem to care. She noticed something shiny on the floor and picked it up. It was a stethoscope someone had dropped. She didn't know what it was really for, but it looked interesting, so she started playing with it. The girl looked at the boy and tilted her head with curiosity. He didn't react at first. She walked closer and sat beside him. She wasn't nervous or scared. To her, he was just another kid to play with. Holding the stethoscope, she gently placed the earpiece on her own ears and moved the chest piece toward the boy. Then, with a playful smile, she reached out and gently tapped the chest piece on his shoulder like she was pretending to examine him. The boy didn't move for a second, but then something happened. His head turned slightly. He looked at her, not past her, not through her, but at her. The girl giggled and tapped the stethoscope again, this time on her own chest. The boy's eyes followed her hand. It was a small reaction, but it was the first time in months he seemed to notice someone else. The billionaire sat up straight in his chair. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It wasn't just the boy's reaction that surprised him. It was the way his expression changed. There was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He wasn't just staring into space anymore. He was engaged, even if just a little. The girl continued to play, showing the stethoscope to the boy and tapping it softly. She handed it to him, and he slowly took it. He didn't smile, but there was something in his face, something new. The billionaire didn't want to blink, afraid he might miss a moment. For the first time in so long, he felt something stir inside him. He had watched doctors try everything. None of them got this kind of response. But this little girl, just by being herself, had reached his son in a way no one else had. The father stood up and walked slowly toward them. He didn't want to interrupt, but he had to be closer. The boy noticed him, but didn't stop what he was doing. He continued to explore the stethoscope, now curious about the sounds it might make. The girl kept talking, even though the boy couldn't hear her. Her presence was warm and natural, and it was clear she wasn't trying to fix anything. She was just playing. That's what made it work. The billionaire knelt beside his son and watched as the boy tapped the stethoscope against different surfaces, noticing how it felt. It was like a switch had been turned on. The father felt something strange. Hope. Not the kind of hope he had paid for, but the kind he had almost forgotten existed. In the middle of a regular hospital day, something completely unexpected had happened, and it had changed everything. The little girl didn't walk away after handing the stethoscope to the boy. She stayed close to him, watching carefully. Something about the boy interested her. Even though he didn't speak or laugh, she seemed to enjoy his company. She began making small sounds, using her mouth, tapping the floor with the toy, and even clapping her hands lightly. The boy didn't react to everything, but at certain moments he would lift his head or shift his eyes. The billionaire, standing across the room, noticed these tiny changes. He narrowed his eyes and moved a little closer without drawing attention. It was hard to accept what he was seeing. The girl wasn't doing anything special, just playing in her own way. Still, it was more effective than the dozens of medical tests and therapy sessions. The man who once controlled every situation in life now stood quietly, unsure of what to think or do. The girl tried another idea. She placed her hand flat on the ground and made a tapping rhythm with her fingers. She looked at the boy, smiled, and then helped him place his hand on the floor too. Then she tapped again, slowly. The boy kept his hand on the floor, and after a few seconds, he looked at her. He couldn't hear the taps, but he felt something. She repeated the same thing, then gently moved his hand so he could feel the vibrations directly. He didn't pull away. Instead, he followed the pattern with his eyes. The billionaire was stunned. None of the professionals had tried anything like that. They focused only on machines, tests, and complex explanations. But this girl, with zero training, found something others had missed. The father felt confused. Why was this child seeing something that grown adults with years of experience had failed to see? The girl wasn't afraid of being wrong. She wasn't worried about doing everything perfectly. She was just exploring. She picked up a plastic cup from a nearby table and used it like a drum, tapping it against the floor. Then she rolled it slowly toward the boy. He watched it move, and this time he reached out and stopped it with his hand. That simple action surprised the father. He had not seen his son react that way in months. The girl clapped gently and smiled again, clearly excited by the progress. The boy didn't smile back, but his eyes stayed on her. He was interested. That was enough for now. The billionaire crossed his arms tightly and breathed through his nose, trying to stay calm. How could a random girl in a hospital hallway do what trained experts couldn't? He didn't want to believe it. But it was happening right in front of him, and he couldn't deny it. The more the girl played, the more confident she became. She placed toys on the ground and tapped them to show different vibrations. She even held the boy's wrist and pressed it against different surfaces, wood, plastic, the floor, so he could feel the difference. The boy didn't resist. His eyes moved to follow her hand. He was paying attention. He was engaging. The father had watched his son sit silently for so long that this moment felt strange. There was no expensive equipment, no medical explanations, just two kids playing. Yet somehow something real was happening, something important. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This wasn't the type of solution he was used to. He had always trusted people with certificates, with big titles, with years of experience. But now, a little girl was showing results. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down, he knew she was helping in a way no one else had. The man's mind was racing. He thought about every doctor he had hired, every therapist he had paid, every method they had tried. They all gave him reports, told him about probabilities and brain scans, but none of them had reached his son. This girl hadn't read any reports. She didn't even know the boy's name. Still, she had managed to create a reaction, a real one. The father began to feel something unusual. Doubt. Doubt in the people he had trusted, doubt in his own decisions. He had spent all his life cutting people out when they didn't perform. He replaced workers without hesitation. He had no patience for failure. But now he realized he might have been looking at things the wrong way. This girl didn't promise anything. She didn't offer a cure. But she did something valuable. She connected. And the boy responded to that connection more than anything else so far. As the girl continued her little experiments, the billionaire stayed frozen, watching quietly. She showed the boy how to tap a ball and feel the movement. He copied her slowly, not always correctly, but the effort was there. Each time he reacted, the father felt something inside him shift. He couldn't explain it. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't how things were supposed to happen. But he knew what he saw was real. It was more than luck. It was working. The girl was giving him something no one else could. Results. He still didn't fully understand it, and it made him feel uncomfortable. How could something so important come from someone so small? But there it was. In the simple play of two kids on the hospital floor, there was a breakthrough. He couldn't walk away from it, not anymore. The boy was responding, and that truth was impossible to ignore. The girl started coming to the hospital every day. Nobody told her to do it. She just came on her own, holding a toy or a drawing in her hand, always looking for the boy. She never knocked or asked permission. She just walked in, smiled, and sat beside him like it was the most normal thing in the world. The boy didn't talk, didn't smile, but she didn't mind. She brought him things, small puzzles, blocks, balls, and showed him how they worked. Sometimes she sang to him, even though she knew he couldn't hear the words. She kept her voice soft and her attitude light. She wasn't there to fix him. She just wanted to be with him. The hospital staff noticed but didn't interfere. She wasn't causing trouble. The boy, who had once sat for hours without moving, now looked at her when she entered. That small change was enough to keep her coming. She didn't act like a doctor or a therapist. She didn't wear a uniform, didn't carry papers or charts. She sat on the floor with him, crossed her legs, and simply played. One day, she brought a small flashlight and showed him how it blinked. Then she tapped on the floor twice and blinked the light once. She repeated it a few times and waited. At first, the boy didn't respond. But eventually, he tapped back. Slowly, the girl started building simple signals, taps, movements, lights. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It was their way of talking. Every day, she added something new to the game. She clapped twice before handing him a toy. She pointed to her eyes when she wanted him to look. Bit by bit, the boy started following her lead. He didn't speak, but he participated. It wasn't a treatment, and it wasn't magic. It was just two kids figuring things out together. The billionaire watched everything from a distance. He didn't stand inside the room. Instead, he leaned against the wall in the hallway, out of sight. At first, he only checked in for a few seconds. But over time, he stayed longer. He found himself waiting for her to arrive. He watched how she sat close to his son, how she never seemed frustrated, even when the boy didn't react right away. He noticed that his son's posture changed when she was there. The boy no longer sat stiffly. He leaned forward sometimes. He reached out to touch things. It wasn't dramatic, but the difference was real. The father had watched so many professionals try and fail. Now, watching from the shadows, he saw progress he couldn't explain. He didn't speak about it, not even to the doctors. He didn't want to scare it away. For the first time in a long while, he felt something different, something close to hope. Before the girl started visiting, the boy's silence was heavy. It filled the room with a kind of sadness that no one talked about. But now, the silence was different. It wasn't empty anymore. When the girl was there, the silence felt alive. There was movement, attention, and something close to joy. The boy started showing interest in small things, shapes, colors, lights. He even began to anticipate her visits. He would turn his head toward the door when she was supposed to arrive. The nurses saw it too. They shared quiet glances, surprised by how much the boy was changing. The girl never demanded anything from him. She was patient. She waited, repeated things, and celebrated every small reaction. To her, the boy wasn't broken. He was just someone who needed time and a different kind of attention. And that was what she gave him day after day, with no agenda and no reward. The father began thinking about everything differently. He remembered all the money he had spent. He thought about the planes he had chartered to meet specialists, the machines he had bought, and the clinics he had toured. He remembered all the answers he had been promised, and all the results that never came. And now, this girl, with no training, no education, and no tools, was making a real difference. She didn't even know what therapy meant, but she was doing it. He felt strange admitting that to himself. He had always believed in expertise and technology. That's how he built his empire. But now, sitting alone in a hallway, watching two kids playing on a hospital floor, he saw something those experts had missed. Connection. The girl reached his son in a way no one else had. Not through expensive equipment, but through kindness, attention, and something as simple as sitting down and staying present. One afternoon, the girl was late. The boy sat quietly, facing the door. He didn't play with any of the toys. He just waited. The father noticed. He was standing in his usual spot, leaning against the wall. The boy's expression wasn't sad, but it was focused. When the girl finally arrived, the boy moved slightly toward her. It was the clearest sign yet. The father took a deep breath. He couldn't deny it anymore. His son wasn't unreachable. He just needed someone who didn't treat him like a patient. He needed someone who saw him as a person. The billionaire still didn't have all the answers, but he now understood one thing for sure. Healing wasn't always about science. Sometimes it was about connection. And that little girl had done what no one else could. She brought life back into his son's eyes. It didn't come from a treatment. It came from her, from empathy, from simplicity. One afternoon, while waiting in the hospital room with his son, the billionaire noticed a small notebook left behind on the chair. It belonged to the girl. She had been drawing in it earlier, making little sketches and symbols she used to communicate with the boy. At first, he wasn't going to touch it. It didn't feel right to look through someone else's things. But then he noticed something sticking out between the pages, something that didn't belong there. It was a small photo, slightly bent at the corners. He pulled it out carefully. In the photo, he saw the girl standing next to a boy about her age. Both were smiling, and both were wearing hearing aids. Behind them was a sign that read, Audiology Clinic. He stared at the photo in silence. Suddenly, everything made more sense. The signals, the patience, the connection. She wasn't just guessing. She understood the world his son now lived in. He sat down slowly, holding the photo in his hand. He kept looking at it, trying to imagine what her life must have been like. She must have spent time in clinics, doing hearing tests, learning to adapt to a world full of sounds she couldn't fully hear. And her brother, Maybe he had been through it too. That would explain why she was so good at reading body language, at finding other ways to communicate. The father thought back to all the time she had worked with his son, the tapping, the signals, the lights, the games. None of it was random. She had lived through similar struggles and turned them into tools. She didn't learn this in school or from books. She had learned by living it. He realized she wasn't just being kind. She was sharing something very personal. That photo, small as it was, told him everything he hadn't understood until now. The billionaire felt something shift in how he saw her. Until that moment, he had only seen her as a curious little girl who showed up every day, uninvited but harmless. Sometimes he had even felt annoyed, thinking she was just playing pretend, doing things without permission. But now he understood she wasn't just guessing, she was using real experience. She had found a way to connect with his son because she had walked a similar path. That kind of empathy didn't come from books or medical degrees. It came from going through something hard and choosing to help someone else with what you learned. He thought about all the specialists he had hired, all the treatments he had paid for. None of them had the kind of insight this girl carried quietly in her notebook. He realized how much he had underestimated her. She had wisdom, real wisdom, and it didn't come from age or money. It came from life. He looked at his son, who was quietly flipping through some of the picture cards the girl had made. The boy was calm, more relaxed than usual. That was another thing the girl had brought. Peace. Not just excitement or stimulation, but a sense of calm. She never pressured him to speak or act. She gave him space, and somehow that was what he needed most. Now the father understood why she had that kind of patience. She knew how it felt to be on the other side. She knew how scary it was to lose sounds, to be surrounded by people who didn't understand what you needed. The billionaire felt something heavy inside his chest, a mix of guilt and respect. He had judged her too quickly as someone small and inexperienced. But in truth, she carried something powerful, something none of his expensive solutions had brought, personal understanding. And that had changed everything for his son. He gently placed the photo back inside the notebook and closed it. He didn't tell anyone what he had found. It felt private, something that didn't need to be shared or explained. But his view of her had changed completely. The next time she entered the room, he greeted her differently. He nodded with real respect. She smiled, unaware of what he had discovered, and went straight to the boy, as always. She took out a new card she had made and handed it to him. The boy tapped it twice, copying her movement. They both laughed quietly, a shared moment that didn't need sound to be full of meaning. The billionaire stood nearby, no longer trying to analyze or control the moment. He just watched. He knew now that he didn't have all the answers. He had money, power, and connections, but none of that had reached his son. What had helped him the most was something no money could buy. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire didn't feel lost. He didn't feel like he was chasing something impossible. He still didn't know what the future held, and he wasn't sure how far his son would progress, but he knew they were no longer stuck. He knew there was a way forward. That photo had opened his eyes. The girl wasn't lucky or just naturally gifted. She was experienced. She had walked the path and brought a light into his son's world. He finally understood her silence, her calm, her methods. They came from memory, from years of working through something difficult. That understanding gave him peace. He had been searching for a miracle in technology, in advanced treatments, in medical breakthroughs, but maybe the real miracle had come in the form of a child who carried quiet strength and deep empathy. And from that moment on, he saw her not as a visitor, but as a guide. One evening, everything in the hospital was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home, and only a few nurses were walking the halls. The boy was sitting on the bed, playing with a flashlight the girl had brought earlier. His father was reading emails on his phone, and the girl was drawing at the small table by the window. Everything felt calm. But suddenly, the lights flickered and went out completely. The entire hospital was thrown into darkness. Machines beeped once, and then went silent. The hallway outside turned pitch black. Emergency lights didn't come on right away. There was no noise, no light, and no explanation. The boy froze for a moment, then panicked. Without his hearing and now without his sight, he didn't understand what was happening. He began to move his arms quickly, breathing fast, his eyes wide and full of fear. He couldn't hear anyone or see anything. The billionaire jumped to his feet, but he didn't know what to do. He called his son's name, but of course, the boy couldn't hear him. He reached for him, but the boy pulled away, confused and scared. The father stood there in the dark, helpless. All the money he had spent, all the experts he had hired, none of that could help now. He couldn't reach his own child. He had no idea how to calm him down without sound or light. His heart was pounding, but he was frozen. That's when the girl moved. She didn't shout or panic. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small flashlight. Then she gently walked over to the boy and held his hands. Her movements were slow and steady. The boy was shaking, but she didn't let go. She turned on the flashlight and pointed it at her own palm, then at the boy's hand. She started using the light to make short flashes, on and off, with rhythm. At first, the boy didn't understand. He kept breathing hard and looking around. But she stayed calm and repeated the same pattern. She tapped his hand lightly each time the light blinked. Slowly, the boy began to focus. The rhythm was familiar. He had seen it before during their games. She kept flashing the light, following the same pattern she had taught him during their signal sessions. One short flash, then two, then pause. She gently touched his fingers each time, keeping him connected to her. After a few minutes, his breathing slowed down. His arms stopped moving so wildly. His shoulders dropped just a little. He was still scared, but he wasn't panicking anymore. He knew someone was there with him, someone he trusted. In the dark, with no words and no sounds, the girl had reached him again, just like she always did. The billionaire watched everything from the side of the room. He could barely see them, only the tiny flashlight and the soft outlines of their hands. But he saw the boy's body change. He saw the fear turning into calm. He was shocked. He had always been the one people depended on, employees, investors, even family. He was used to solving problems quickly and efficiently, but here, in a dark hospital room, he had no control. The girl had stepped in without hesitation. She didn't wait for instructions or permission. She just acted. And she did exactly what the boy needed. The father realized something painful. He didn't know how to talk to his son. He didn't know his world, his signals, or his fears. But this girl, this quiet, ordinary girl, had taken the time to learn. She had built something he couldn't. She wasn't his daughter, but she knew his son better than he did. The boy was now holding the flashlight in his hands, pointing it at the wall and copying the light patterns. The girl smiled, even though he couldn't see her face. She tapped the floor twice, their simple way of saying okay. The boy tapped once in response. The panic was gone. The billionaire slowly walked over and sat next to them on the floor. He didn't say anything. He just watched. He had never felt this kind of emotion before. It wasn't about business or failure. It was about being completely powerless and watching someone else succeed where he couldn't. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. In that quiet moment, he saw something clearly for the first time. His son didn't need someone who gave orders or made decisions. He needed someone who stayed close, who tried to understand, who learned his language. The girl had done exactly that. As the emergency lights finally came on, the room slowly lit up again. The machines beeped once more. But the moment between them didn't break. The boy kept holding the flashlight, and the girl sat beside him. The billionaire looked at them with a new kind of respect. He wasn't the center of this story anymore. He wasn't the hero, but he didn't feel angry about that. Instead, he felt thankful. That night had shown him something he could never forget. His son didn't need big solutions. He needed connection, trust, and someone who truly understood him. The girl had done what no expert could. In the middle of a power outage, in complete darkness, she had reached him. No words, no sounds. Just patience, light, and love. The billionaire now saw the truth. She had built a bridge between him and his son, one that he had never been able to build on his own. The next morning, the hospital started like any other day. Nurses walked from room to room, checking charts and giving medicine. Doctors discussed reports in the hallway. Everything felt normal, quiet, serious, and routine. But then something unusual happened. From one of the rooms, a loud sound echoed through the corridor. It wasn't a machine or a medical alarm. It was laughter. Pure, loud, and real laughter. People stopped walking. A nurse paused with a tray in her hand. A doctor looked up from his notes. The sound was coming from the room where the billionaire's son stayed. The boy who had been silent for so long, who hadn't spoken or smiled in months, was now laughing. Inside the room, he was sitting on the floor with the girl. They were playing a game using small cups and spoons. She made silly noises with the cups, and he copied her rhythm with clumsy but happy taps. They weren't using words, but they were communicating perfectly. The girl tapped the edge of a table twice, and the boy followed with 3 quick taps and a big smile. Then she waved her hands in a silly dance, and he threw his head back and laughed again. His laugh wasn't forced or soft. It was loud, real, and full of joy. The girl laughed with him, clapping her hands like it was the best game in the world. They built new signs with their hands, mixing them with head movements and facial expressions. It was their own language, built over days of playing together. Nurses peeked into the room and couldn't believe what they saw. The boy, who used to sit quietly, not reacting to anyone, was now active and expressive. For the first time, the room didn't feel like part of a hospital. It felt like a place where a child was truly being a child again. The father stood just outside the door, hiding slightly behind the wall. He didn't want to interrupt. He just watched, barely breathing. His eyes were locked on his son. When he saw the boy laugh again, really laugh, something inside him broke. Tears filled his eyes and rolled down his face, but he didn't wipe them. He let them fall. He had imagined many outcomes for his son over the past few months. He had feared the worst, had prepared himself for a life without hearing, without connection, without joy. But this moment was something he had almost given up on. He had accepted that he might never hear his son laugh again. But now, that sound, the pure laughter of his own child, filled the air. And it wasn't caused by doctors, devices, or medicine. It was caused by a girl who had no plan except to be present, to play, and to connect. He remembered all the things he had tried, all the hospitals, the treatments, the procedures. He had gone after the best experts money could find, but no one had brought this kind of progress. No one had made his son feel safe enough to laugh again. And now it was happening. The girl had done it, not with expensive tools, but with time, patience, and attention. The father had spent his life solving problems with resources and authority. But this wasn't something he could fix with power. His son didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be understood, and the girl had understood him in a way no one else did. She didn't treat him like a case. She treated him like a friend. That made all the difference. The billionaire stayed quiet, realizing how much this child, this small, kind girl, had changed everything. She had given him something he didn't know was possible anymore: hope. Inside the room, the boy kept laughing as they made silly faces at each other. He tapped his foot on the floor, trying to create a rhythm, and the girl joined in. They weren't just playing, they were building something, trust, joy, and friendship. The boy had been so closed off for months, lost in silence and confusion, but now, with her, he was completely open. The girl gently took his hands and showed him a new sign. He copied it, then made one of his own. She copied him back. They weren't using sound, but they were sharing everything. A simple cup became a drum. A hand wave became a greeting. They had turned a hospital room into a space of happiness. And more than that, they had turned silence into connection. The boy wasn't just reacting, he was choosing to engage. He wasn't afraid anymore. He felt safe. He felt free. As the laughter continued, the billionaire finally stepped back from the door. He didn't go in. He didn't want to interrupt something so important. He just stood there, quietly holding on to the moment. That sound, his son's laughter, was something he thought he had lost forever. But now it was back, thanks to a girl who had walked into their lives by chance and changed everything. She hadn't done it for money or recognition. She did it because she cared, and through her presence she gave the boy not just happiness, but safety, the feeling that he was understood, valued, and loved. The billionaire wiped his face and took a deep breath. He knew deep in his heart that without her none of this would have happened. His son's progress wasn't just medical, it was emotional, it was human. And it all started with one girl who simply decided to sit beside a boy and stay. The news came unexpectedly during a quiet afternoon at the hospital. The girl had just left the room after playing with the boy, leaving behind a few new hand-drawn cards and a small wooden puzzle. A nurse entered the room holding a file and mentioned casually that the girl's family was being transferred to another city. Her brother's treatment would continue in a different hospital with a specialized team. The billionaire was sitting near the window, checking emails on his tablet, but the words made him stop. He looked up slowly, trying to understand. "Transferred?" he asked. The nurse nodded and explained it would probably happen in the next 2 days. The father didn't say anything. He just sat still. The girl had become the most important presence in his son's life, and now she would leave. A quiet panic started to grow inside him. He realized how deeply this might affect his son. He didn't tell the boy right away. He watched him sit on the floor, tapping a pattern into the wooden puzzle piece, copying a game he and the girl had invented. The boy was smiling, completely focused. The father knew that smile hadn't existed before the girl came. He'd seen his son come back to life little by little, piece by piece. Now, with just 2 days left before she moved away, he felt lost. He tried to think logically. Maybe they could visit sometimes, maybe video calls could help. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the same. Her presence, her energy, her understanding, those couldn't be replaced through a screen. At the same time, the billionaire received a message from one of the doctors he had contacted months ago. A team of specialists from overseas had finally reviewed his son's case. They offered a new treatment, an experimental procedure using cochlear implants and advanced neural training. It was everything the billionaire used to believe in: science, technology, and progress. These were people with credentials, data, and a proven track record. The cost didn't matter to him. He could fly his son anywhere in the world if necessary. But now, as he read through the medical notes, something felt wrong. He looked at his son again. Would this new treatment erase what they had built? Would it help, or push him into another world of machines and cold evaluations? The billionaire had chased results for so long, but this time he wasn't sure. The girl had reached his son without devices. No machines, no surgery, just presence, real presence. He felt torn. He didn't want to risk his son's chance to hear again, but he also didn't want to destroy the one thing that had truly worked. The girl's connection had brought safety, confidence, and trust. things no machine had ever offered. That night, the billionaire sat alone in his car, in the hospital parking lot. He didn't turn on the engine. He just sat in silence. His mind was stuck between two choices. On one hand, the doctors promised a possible path to hearing, a chance at something close to normal. On the other hand, the girl had brought his son out of isolation. She didn't restore hearing, but she restored life. He thought about all the times he had believed money could solve everything, and he realized now this wasn't a problem to be solved. His son didn't need fixing. He needed people who saw him, who stayed, who tried. The girl had done that every day without asking for anything in return. She was just a kid, yet she had done more than any adult in the room. Her family's transfer wasn't her fault, but the loss felt huge. It felt personal, and it was. The next morning, the billionaire stood in the hallway, watching the girl and his son play together again. She didn't know yet that she was leaving soon. She was laughing as the boy built a tower out of paper cups. When it fell, they both signed again and started over. The father didn't want to break the news. He didn't want the moment to end, but he also knew the time was coming. He had to decide. Would he move forward with the new treatment, chasing a sound his son might not recognize? Or would he focus on strengthening the bond that already existed, the one thing that had brought visible change? For the first time in his life, a decision didn't come from logic. It came from something else. Watching his son laugh and reach out without fear, he understood something clearly. Happiness had already returned. Not from science, but from someone who had simply cared. That evening, as the hospital lights dimmed and visiting hours ended, the billionaire sat by his son's bed. The girl had gone home, still unaware of the plans being made around her. The boy was asleep, holding the little flashlight she had given him during the blackout. The father looked at the quiet room, then at his sleeping child. He now understood how much the girl had given them. Without her, none of this progress would have happened. She had been more than a friend. She had been a bridge. He knew the medical team would call again the next day, expecting an answer, but he wasn't ready to give them one yet. Not because he didn't trust the science, but because he finally trusted something more important, his son's right to be understood before being treated. And he owed that realization to a girl who came without warning and gave everything simply by staying close. That night, the billionaire couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, but his thoughts wouldn't slow down. The news about the girl moving away, the doctors offering new treatments, and the image of his son's laughter. It was all too much to process. He got out of bed quietly and walked through the silent house. Without really thinking, he stopped in front of a door he hadn't opened in a long time. It was his wife's old room. She had passed away years ago, and he had kept the room just as it was, locked and untouched. She had struggled with hearing problems for most of her life, something he had tried hard to help with, just like he was trying to help his son now. Slowly, he turned the handle and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of her perfume. Everything was still there, her books, her clothes, and her writing desk. He sat down at her desk and opened one of the drawers. Inside, there were some old notebooks, a few jewelry boxes, and loose papers. As he moved things around, he found an envelope with his name on it. It had clearly been there for years. He paused, staring at it. The handwriting was hers. His hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope and pulled out a folded letter. The paper was yellowed around the edges. He unfolded it and began to read. The letter wasn't long, but every word hit deep. She had written it for him during the final months of her illness, knowing that one day he would need to hear from her again. In the letter, she wrote about her fears, her love for their son, and the importance of not closing himself off from the world. She said that real healing didn't always come from science, but from people who truly cared. The part that stayed with him most was near the end. She had written, "If our son ever faces what I have faced, promise me one thing. Don't fight the world alone. Let love come in, even if it comes from unexpected places. Sometimes the people who help us most aren't the ones we plan for." He read that part again, then again. He leaned back in the chair, holding the letter tightly in his hands. He thought of the girl, how she had appeared out of nowhere and done more for their son than anyone else. And he thought about how he had almost overlooked her because she wasn't a professional, because she wasn't part of his original plan. His wife's words now made everything clearer. She had seen the future in some way. She had known that love, in its simplest form, could reach where nothing else could. He finally understood what she had meant. He sat in that room for a long time, remembering her voice, her calm way of seeing things. She had always believed in connection, in trust, in letting people in. He had been the opposite, always guarding himself, always trying to control outcomes. But now, sitting there with her words in his hand, he realized how wrong he had been. He had placed too much faith in structure and money, thinking they were the answer to everything, but his wife had known better. She had lived with the silence. She had fought through it and understood what his son might be going through now. The girl had given their son something priceless, safety, joy, and understanding. The father now saw that it wasn't about choosing between medicine and human connection. It was about balance. And most importantly, it was about trusting the heart of a child, even if that heart didn't come with a title or a degree. He walked over to the closet and opened it. Inside were a few old coats, a scarf, and a small photo album. He picked it up and flipped through the pages. Photos of their life together before and after their son was born. His wife always had a smile, even when things were hard. One picture showed her holding their baby boy, both of them smiling. Her eyes looked tired, but her face showed peace. That's what she had wanted for their son, not just health, but peace. He closed the album and placed it back. Then he folded the letter carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He turned off the light and stepped out of the room, locking the door behind him. The hallway felt colder now, but his thoughts were clear. He wasn't going to block the girl's place in their life, not anymore. His wife's message had been heard, finally. As he walked back toward his son's room, he stopped outside the door and listened. There was no sound, of course, but he knew the boy was asleep. He opened the door gently. His son was curled up, holding the flashlight, just like every night since the blackout. The billionaire walked in quietly and sat beside the bed. He looked at his son's peaceful face and thought about how far they had come, not through medical charts or expensive treatments, but through moments of real care. The girl had played a huge part in that. And now, with his wife's letter still in his jacket, he knew what to do. He wasn't going to make the decision based on fear or pressure. He was going to follow what mattered most, what made his son feel seen and safe. The answer wasn't only in science. The answer was also in allowing love to stay, especially when it came from unexpected places. The next morning, the billionaire woke up early, even before the hospital staff started their rounds. He got dressed quickly and left his house without checking his emails or making phone calls. His decision was already made. He drove to the hospital with one goal in mind, to talk to the girl's family. When he arrived, he didn't go straight to his son's room. Instead, he asked the front desk where the girl's parents were staying. After a few minutes, he found them sitting in the family waiting area. They looked surprised to see him. The father of the boy, known by many as a cold and distant man, was now standing in front of them, nervous but clear. He took a deep breath and explained that he had heard about their transfer. Then he asked, honestly and directly, if they would consider staying. He didn't want to lose the girl who had changed everything. At first, the girl's parents were quiet. They looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The billionaire quickly added that he wasn't just asking out of emotion. He explained that he wanted to support them in a real way. If they stayed, he would make sure the girl's brother continued receiving proper treatment at a local clinic. He promised full financial support, doctors, therapy, whatever they needed. But more than the money, he told them something he hadn't said to anyone else. Their daughter had saved his son. She had reached him in a way no adult had. She brought him back from silence, from fear, from being disconnected. The billionaire no longer saw her as just a visitor or a sweet child. She was part of his son's healing process, not by accident, but by something deeper. He wanted her to stay, not as a helper, not as a tool, but as family. The girl entered the room quietly while they were still talking. She didn't interrupt. She stood near the doorway, listening. When she realized they were talking about her, she walked over and looked up at the billionaire. He turned to her and smiled, for the first time not as a businessman, but as a father. He crouched down to her level and spoke directly. He told her that he didn't have the right words to describe how thankful he was. He said his son smiled again because of her, trusted again because of her, laughed again because of her. He said he didn't want her to leave, not because she owed them anything, but because she already belonged to their story. He asked if she would stay, not with a job title, not under a contract, but just as herself, a friend, a light, the same girl who had walked into their lives and made everything better. The girl looked at her parents. They gave her a small nod. Then she turned back to the billionaire and said something simple. "I don't need anything to stay. I already feel like I'm part of this." Her answer wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. She didn't want to be treated like a professional or a miracle. She was a kid who had gone through her own struggles and saw another child going through something similar. That connection was real. That was why it worked. She didn't need recognition or gifts. She just wanted to keep helping, to keep playing, to keep being close to the boy who had become her friend. Her response made the billionaire pause. He had spent his life negotiating deals, writing contracts, and calculating risks. But now, the most valuable agreement he ever received came in a sentence from a child, with no signature, no papers, just trust. The girl's family agreed to stay, and arrangements were made that same day. The billionaire used his influence to make sure her brother would be transferred to one of the best audiology clinics in the city. He also arranged transportation, housing, and whatever else the family needed. But he didn't treat them like clients or employees. He made it clear that none of this was a favor. It was gratitude. It was acknowledgement. At the hospital, news spread quickly that the girl and her family were staying. The nurses smiled. The doctors were surprised, but nobody questioned it. Everyone had seen the boy's transformation. They knew the reason behind it. When the girl walked back into his room that afternoon, the boy lit up. He tapped a small rhythm on the table, their shared signal. She tapped it back. No words were spoken, but everything was understood. They were a team again, and they weren't going anywhere. That night, for the first time in weeks, the billionaire didn't feel afraid of tomorrow. He stayed by his son's bed, watching the boy sleep peacefully. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the silence, the frustration, and then the girl. She had arrived without warning, without invitation, but she brought exactly what was missing. Not a treatment plan, not a miracle cure, but something even stronger. Connection. She had taught him more than any expert. She had shown him that healing was not only about science, it was about love, presence, and trust. He looked at his son, then at the drawing the girl had left on the table. It was of 3 stick figures, the boy, the girl, and a tall figure holding their hands. No words, just that image. And in that moment, the billionaire finally understood. His son didn't just need to hear again, he needed to be heard. And now he truly was. Years had passed. The girl was no longer a child. She was now a young woman, standing on a graduation stage, wearing a cap and gown, ready to receive her diploma. The auditorium was full of people, families, teachers, students, all clapping and cheering. But in one row near the front, two people stood out, the billionaire and his son. The boy, now a teenager, sat upright, his face full of pride. His hearing wasn't fully restored, but it had improved with time, technology, and therapy. Still, the biggest part of his healing came from the girl, now the young woman on stage, who had stayed by his side all those years. She was graduating in speech and hearing therapy, specialized in child rehabilitation. She had chosen this path because of what she lived through, and now her dream was complete. The moment her name was called, she smiled brightly. The two in the front row stood up, clapping with full hearts. The applause around them grew louder, but for the billionaire and his son, the world had paused. As she walked across the stage to receive her certificate, the memories came flooding back. The games with cups, the light signals, the hand signs, the hospital room filled with laughter. She was no longer that little girl tapping on the table. She had become a professional, educated, confident, ready to help other children just like she had helped him. When she turned to face the audience, her eyes searched for them. She found them easily. The boy raised his hands and signed a familiar gesture, something only the two of them understood. It was the old signal they had invented together, now filled with deeper meaning. Everyone clapped, but what happened next silenced the room for a moment. The boy stood, and with clear voice and confidence called her my sister. The audience watched, moved by the simple truth in those words. That one word, sister, meant everything. It wasn't just something sweet, he said. It was real. They weren't related by blood, but their bond had grown stronger than most families. The audience felt the emotion in the room. Some clapped again, others wiped tears from their eyes. The young woman stood still for a second, then brought her hands to her face, trying to hold back tears. She stepped off the stage, walked straight toward the boy and the billionaire, and hugged them both. No one said much. They didn't need to. Their connection spoke louder than any speech could. After the ceremony ended, the crowd moved outside. Families took pictures, graduates threw their caps, and laughter filled the air, but the three of them found a quiet spot under a tree nearby. There, the boy gently tapped her shoulder. She smiled, already knowing what he meant. Without needing to say anything, they began to perform the song in signs they once created. Their hands moved slowly and in sync, repeating the gestures they had invented years ago during one of the hardest times of their lives. It wasn't a real song by music standards. There was no melody, no instruments, and no lyrics. But for them, it was a song full of memories, emotions, and shared moments. It told a story that no one else could fully understand. The billionaire sat quietly, watching them, remembering the hospital, the silence, the fear, and how she had brought his son back to life with nothing more than time, kindness, and attention. Now the boy signed each part of the song clearly, confidently. His movements were steady and full of meaning. The girl responded with matching signs, both smiling through tears. What had started as a simple game had become a language of their own. It was their bond, their history, and now it was a celebration of everything they had overcome together. The billionaire wiped his eyes and smiled. Years ago, he had believed that family was something fixed, something defined by birth, genetics, or documents. But now, watching his son and the girl who had become his daughter in every way that mattered, he knew better. Family could be chosen. It could be formed through pain, healing, and love. He thought about the girl's first day at the hospital, the flashlight, the drawings, the patience she had shown. She had never asked for anything in return. She had given everything she had, freely, completely, and changed their lives forever. And now she stood with them, not because of duty, but because she belonged. The billionaire stood up, walked over to them, and placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "You've both grown so much," he said simply. They nodded. No long speeches were needed. They had lived this journey together. And now they stood side by side, stronger than ever. As the sun began to set, the three of them walked back toward the main building. Other families passed by, laughing, hugging, taking photos. But their small group moved slowly, peacefully, not needing attention. The boy looked up at the billionaire and signed, "Thank you for letting her stay." The man nodded and replied, "She never needed permission. She was always part of this." The girl smiled and linked her arm with the boy's. They had many memories behind them, but they also had a future ahead. New children to help, new lives to touch, and a bond that would never break. The billionaire walked beside them, finally feeling complete, not because of power or wealth, but because he had learned what truly mattered. That day wasn't just her graduation. It was proof that love, when chosen and nurtured, could grow into something unshakable. And at the center of it all was a simple truth. Family is built by the people who choose to stay. And that's a wrap. I'm so glad you stayed with us all the way to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the story, and tell us which part you liked the most or the least. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. See you in the next one.